Turn my mic on, thank you. We take care of people in their home or in assisted living or independent living, wherever they might be. But all our caregivers are seniors themselves. So we have probably right now a little over 130 caregivers that serve the whole Metro West and Boston area. And our average age is around 70 years old. So I'm not here to try to recruit you. I am going to talk about, and I have some information, not just about us, but about some of the things we'll talk about today. I can hand out if you're interested in some other resources, books and online that you might find helpful. But I wanted to do this because I've been working, it's a big career change for me. I had been in HR and corporate America for 25 or 30 years before I bought the franchise and started working with seniors back in 2011. Hi, come on in and find a seat. I'll give everybody a minute to get settled. So one of the things, I went back to this first slide because this is not really so much about finding a job in retirement or looking for what that might be, although I'm going to touch on some opportunities. It's really to help think about what I like to think people are still here for a reason. And I think as I've met a lot of seniors, I've met a lot of seniors who don't feel like they are sort of still here for a reason. And I wanted to really explore some thinking about that and get them to think about why are they feeling that way, and how to really sort of rethink aging, because we're in an area that's really new for all of us. I mean, some of you may have had parents or grandparents that lived into their late 70s, 80s, or 90s. But really, even in the early 1900s, the average age of people was really about 49 or 50. And even making it to 65 was a stretch. And oftentimes when they made it to 60, 65, if they had a serious illness like a stroke or a heart attack or anything like that, the large percentage of them passed away within 14 or days after they had that event. We didn't have the medicine back then and the techniques to keep us all alive. So really staying, being past 65 is still really new. So, I'm not retired. I'm not necessarily looking forward to retirement. I'm not looking to retire. So that's my bias, because I enjoy being involved, and that's what gives me sort of my reason for being around, is talking to other people. But the traditional definition of retiring is sort of withdrawing or leaving. It's the state of just being retired. You've left someplace and sort of withdrawn. And I think that has been pretty much a traditional definition of retirement. I know it was for my father and for his generation, but now what we're seeing is that if people do retire altogether, it's more like a door closing and opening up another one. And that, yes, there's a lot of people that they want to leave work, they want to leave that place where they've been for however long, but they're looking forward to going into doing something else. It's not just going to be the withdrawal that we've seen in the past. And so I want to think about this as sort of reframing retirement, as given a different lens to look at. And I'm going to look at it, I look at it in sort of 10-year chunks, because 10 years it's a decade. And whether it's 65 to 75 or whatever your first 10 years are after you retired, I want you to sort of think about that, because 10 years makes a huge difference. Think of how many changes have taken place between when you were 7 years old and 17. I mean, you were just getting started in school at 7, roughly. And 17, you're now getting ready to graduate high school. Think of all the family dynamics that changed, everything that you experienced in that time frame, all the memories that you have. That's a very large chunk of time. Or you look at 17 to 27. You know, for a lot of people, they've left high school, they either went out to work on their own, or they went to college, then they may end up going to graduate school. I know back when I got married, most people were getting married in their early 20s and starting a family in their early 20s. So, you know, again, another really big change. And even if you think of it on sort of the macro level, look at the 60s. Look what happened during that decade of the 60s, where you had a president from Massachusetts elected, a first Catholic president, and remember that, and then assassinated, the Vietnam War. I mean, all that happened in that decade. And I'm positioning that because I want you to think about, if you're 65 now, there's a good chance you're going to live to be 75. If you're 75 now, there's a very good chance you're going to live to be 85. If you're 85 now, there's a very good chance you're going to live to be 95. Now, that's a little of a simplification, but the longer you live, your lifespan still continues to increase, not at the same amount, but it's really pretty close. So think about that what the next 10 years might be like for you. And one of the other things that this tells us, and you think of all the changes that have taken place, it's not just that change happens, it's you're supposed to change. And again, when I talk to a lot of seniors in conversation or wherever, you know, they're not thinking about changing. Part of their thinking about retirement is that I just want to sit back and relax, or I just want to, you know, not be bothered so much with changes. But changes are going to happen whether you want them to or not, whether you initiate them or not, because change is supposed to happen. And I think, particularly in the early stages of your retirement, but not just necessarily so, there can be quite a bit of change that takes place if you have the mindset for it. So again, going back, it's really about the mindset. The change is really driven by the belief you have about yourself, about your capabilities, about, you know, what it is you want to do. We are in a society that is really a pretty ageist society. You know, it is still very, very youth-orientated. And what happens, why ageism is very insidious, is that we internalize the belief that your younger self is better than your older self. And you know, people think, oh, I wish I was 50 again, or I wish I was 40 again, or no, I don't want to tell you my age because I don't know why, it sounds old. Old is not good in this society. And that kind of attitude really impedes what you want to do, what you're capable of doing, you know? It's the old saying, you are what you think you are. And if you think old means that is less than young, that's how you're going to act. So really, what part of sort of reframing retirement is about is reframing aging itself. not just a simple act of retirement. This I took, my wife is a kindergarten teacher. She's on one end of the spectrum. I'm at the other end of the spectrum. And it seems to work out. I don't know how. I couldn't be she's got 20 kids in her, 5-year-olds in her class, and I wouldn't last 5 minutes in her class. You know, I mean, it's like, no, I don't know how she does it. But anyway, this has been on a magnet on our refrigerator. One of her kids gave it to her years and years and years ago. You know, it's from Christopher Robin Pooh's Adventure. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. And that's what you're telling your 5 and 6-year-olds. Well, this is what I'm telling my 65 and 70 and 75-year-olds, because we've oftentimes lost the belief that we really are braver than we believe, stronger than we seem, and smarter than you think. And I think it's if there was one thing I'd have you remember from today, it's this. Whatever one you want, because you know, I think you have to be brave to age. I think you have to be strong to age well. And I think we're all much smarter than we think we are. I know some of you get confused, you know, we don't have VCRs anymore, so we're fortunate, you know. But, you know, with all the electronics around and other things, but that's only one tiny little bit of being smart. The reason we're a very successful company in hiring seniors is people ask me, well, do we give them a lot of training, et cetera? And I said, well, let me put it this way. Most of the people come to us with about 50 years of experience. And it's experience that you can't get out of a book, out of somebody sitting in front of a class. It's called the real world. And if you've lived through all different things, if you've taken care of elderly relatives, if you've just been around elderly relatives, if you've had all these family crises, you know how to deal with life and things that go on in life and different people in your life better than anybody else. That's a kind of smart that you can't buy. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about, there's a book out called The Longevity Dividend. And this is not about that book. My career in HR, I looked at something called human capital. And I looked at people in organizations and tried to understand, if we're hiring these people, they are really the foundation for how well your organization does. So are the people's knowledge growing? Are they becoming more committed? Are they really, as any capital that you would invest, growing? Well, the dividend is capital. And your length of time being here is sort of a gift. It's an extra bonus. Like I said, you know, it wasn't that long ago, by 50, 60, it would be very rare for you to go on to be 70 or 75. As a matter of fact, if you really think back to the billions of people that have lived on this planet since people began, people over 70 have to be 0.00001%, if that much, of the population, because it just didn't happen. So this is a real gift to you. And so what I want to talk about as we go further is, so how do we use this gift? How do we use it for other people? And how do we use it to make ourselves feel good as well? So I'm going to talk about a couple of things. One is, we've got some extra bonuses here. This is the extra bonus. Spin the wheel, get the extra bonus. So it's not just about living longer. Has anybody heard of this thing called neuroplasticity? You have, yes. It wasn't that long ago when scientists believed that your brain stopped growing. And not only did it stop growing, it stopped learning. And so at some point, and they were never really sure what point that was, but you couldn't learn anymore. But what scientists say now is that the brain is continually changing and resculpting itself in response to experience and learning. So you're not creating new brain cells, but you're creating what's called neural pathways, how the brain cells interact with each other. And that's why you can learn a new language at 70 or 75. It's why you can learn a musical instrument. It's when you can learn a new card game or learn chess. It's not really just for young folks. As a matter of fact, what they have found is it can happen at any age. If the brain is healthy, that is, it's not diseased like with dementia, it is always still growing. However, if, for example, you're a crossword puzzle player or a Sudoku player and have been doing that for years and years, that doesn't help grow the brain because those pathways are already developed. It's like, all right, I'm just going down this road again. So something challenging you, something new in your learning is what's going to really help keep the brain, grow and actually keep it healthy. One of the things that happens with dementia is that if you think of it sort of like a savings bank, there's only, what it does is the brain starts to diminish in dementia. It actually begins to really shrink because of the way the proteins attack it, et cetera. And the more sort of you have in the bank, the better off you are. And so if you want to think about it, when you go and learn a new dance step, you just go dancing for the first time and whatever, or learn a new game or whatever, you're sort of building up that bank in your brain. You're creating new ways for it to learn. So that's the other bonus of the longevity dividend. Longer to live, but really your brain can remain active for a long, long time if you want it to be. Another nice thing to know is that actually what scientists are finding out, there's this hormone called oxytocin. And it's a feel-good hormone. It makes you feel good. It's like a runner's high or whatever. But it comes about when you're being kind to somebody, when you're being nice to somebody. Kindness is what sort of generates this. And you do something good for somebody, you feel good yourself. Well, guess what? That's a hormone that's being released in your brain that makes you feel that way. And again, your brain will continue to do that. It's not something that's going to stop. So we have more choices than ever before. And when I look at the dividend, again, think of it as, if you want to think of it as a pot of money or capital, whatever you want to think of it as, what I just want to look at is some of the choices are where you take this newfound money and you spend it, which is good. Maybe you go on a cruise. Maybe you buy new golf clubs. Maybe you do whatever for your hobby or recreation. That's spending it. But like any good investment person, I want you to think about what does it mean to invest part of this dividend as well? I'm not saying you should invest all of it, but I'm just suggesting you invest a part of it. How much a part of it you invest, it's up to you. And we're going to talk about what I mean by investing in it. Any questions so far? Everybody, you can all hear me okay and we're going along okay? So I told you, this is a little bit different way, hopefully, for you to think about things. So one of the dividend options that I think investing is about volunteering. There are, I'm sure a lot of you have been, affiliated over time with some national, nonprofits. You might have invested, given money to United Way or do various things with Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, whatever it might be. But there are literally in Massachusetts thousands of local nonprofits that cover the spectrum of interest that people have. And I'm just suggesting it might be nice to think about, well, what would I do how would I invest in a non-for-profit or two? Because again, going back to my previous slide, there's a lot of choices, but there's no really wrong way to do anything. And it's not something that you have to necessarily think of as doing for 10 years. It might be, let me try this for a few months and see what it's like. If it's not for me, I'm going to move on and do something else. If that's not for me, I'm going to move on and do something else. Because you have that flexibility right now. You're going to be learning new things, which is good for you. And you're still going to be investing the dividend and giving your time to something that could use it. Intergenerational activities are very important because we live in a society where I'm sure you've seen it yourself, your families are scattered. And if you're grandparents, you may not see your grandkids as much as when you grew up with your grandparents, which were probably pretty close by. I know mine were. I did a little volunteer work at a middle school, and in talking to the middle schoolers, they're 11, 12, 13 years old. So many of them see their grandparents maybe once a year. They just don't have any idea what older people are, honestly, what they do, how their preconceptions of people when they don't meet them on a regular basis. It's just astonishing, So to work with a group like that, I found it really interesting because they were still they really absorbed a lot of what you told them, and they really needed it. I mean, when you're 12 or 13 years old, it really makes a difference as to where you're going to go in life, depending on the role models that you have. Local government, town libraries, town boards. I was given this presentation at a Rotary in the spring, and someone came up to me from Sudbury and said, they just voted down a new senior center. And the Sudbury Senior Center is not really great. They're really nice people there, but they're in a very small place, part of a much larger building. And I said, well, Sudbury is a town of, I had looked up the statistics, I forget how big it was, but I said, over 15% of your population is over 65. So, that's a pretty big voting block. If you're really interested in doing that, get involved. Get involved, not just at your local government, but I'm saying organize seniors. Go to the selectmen, go to the town manager. You have 50 or 75 seniors that are waiting to see your town selectmen when there's meetings coming up. It's going to have a little more influence on things than people going down individually. I know a lot of towns, much like Southborough is looking at, so what do we do with the downtown? We want to reconfigure it a little bit. And I say, get the seniors involved. You have memories. How do you want to leave the town? How would you like to make an imprint on the town? Because a lot of this is thinking about sort of, well, what do I want to leave as a legacy? What do I want people to think about me, when I move on? And this type of volunteering around, again, areas that, you have a big interest in, I think is a really good way to go. Now, sort of in terms of not just investing, but spending your money, if you want to invest in your own brain health, there are a lot of really free degree and non-degree programs. I mean, Framingham State University now has quite a few tuition-free programs that are degree programs if you wanted to go. There's quite a few programs that are non-degree programs. We have great art museums around here and other facilities. If you're not involved in the arts, and if you, again, there is no reason. I mean, I had a good friend. I've had a good friend. I've known him since high school, and he really retired, maybe roughly 10 years ago now. And all of a sudden on Facebook, online, I see all these paintings by him. And I said, Cliff, what you just learn this? He said, no, I did it in high school, but then I left it for a long time. I'm just getting back into it. And he does these really interesting paintings. He tries to sell them, but more than anything else, it's just him picking this up and getting a little more education and restarting something he learned, he really, really wanted to do back then. And that's true for any of sort of hobbies, sports, etc. So, but there's also one other one, and there really is, and this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about Seniors Helping Seniors, but I don't want you to be thinking about a job per se, but just in general about what it is that we do. And we'll just talk a little bit more about that. And we'll talk, I have some good information that I can give you later about part-time jobs if you're interested. So, there are some jobs out there. We have one that can make you sort of healthier, stronger, and wiser. But I want to mention two other health risks about aging that are very prominent in this society, and actually really in sort of the modern world right now. One is loneliness. And it doesn't just necessarily mean living alone, although in Massachusetts we have about 350,000 seniors who are living alone. With scattered families the way they are, I know you can connect by phone with people, et cetera, but we see just a lot of folks that are alone in their house because one or another spouse has passed away, the kids aren't close enough, or the kids are working and just not able to get there. Actually, the client that I probably felt was my loneliest client lived in a really nice new home in Southborough, lived with her son, her daughter-in-law, and two teenage boys. And her husband had just passed away, so she moved from her own house, very nice house, in here. So, it had everything that you could want, except when I walk in the house, it was like craziness because, there are two executives flying off to work at 7 in the morning, not getting home till 7 at night. The boys had to be driven someplace at the time to go to all their sports stuff. They're both going to private schools. And here's this 89-year-old woman sitting there, looking at all of this spinning around her and just feeling so out of place because she just wasn't, and it wasn't intentional, but again, that's just the way their life was structured. So we ended up bringing two people in, really just to help make her a sandwich, go out for a walk around the neighborhood. On Friday, she had a standing appointment to get her hair permed someplace, so, take her there, and just to get her out. And two things happened in about 2 months. One was I found out she had gone to a psychiatrist for depression, which is really closely aligned with loneliness. And he ended up cutting her prescription in half because she had people there during the day that she could talk to. But the big surprise was, and I don't know why this was such a surprise to me, but it's just how ignorant I am about some things, men are in general, I think, is that both the people I had brought over were widows. And she told me afterwards, I've been a little over a year, I've never talked to anybody about how I felt and what happened, because I can't talk to my son. I'm not on the best terms with my daughter-in-law, so I'm not going to talk to her. So she was really able to talk to these two people who had a little bit different experiences in widowhood. One had actually gone through a hospice bereavement program, and they So she began to incorporate some of the things she learned there in it. It turns out they were both Catholics, had gone to the same church for years, but different times, et cetera, not seen each other. So they had that in common. It was unbelievable how much she changed in a very short period of time just by having these people here a couple hours a day and having somebody that she could really talk to and not feel, again, so alone. Because this is what happens. You lose social networks. You know, I saw it with my mother. I took care of my mother. She lived in Ashland. I'm in Southborough. It's not that far away. But again, I'm running over there to do her to-do list. All the neighbors except one were gone either to assisted livings or gone to live with family, et cetera. And my first real lesson in this business was, me coming home and complaining to my wife, I got so much to do here at the house. I'm trying to take care of a house here, take care of her, And she says, Doug, she doesn't even care if you go and do all this stuff. You just need to go and sit and have a cup of tea with her. She just wants to talk to you, talk to somebody, and just sit there and, like it used to be able to communicate with somebody. Because when that happens, what you're really acknowledging is them, that they're still important to you, that they're here for a reason. And that's the other big risk factor, is that a lot of people, particularly seniors, no longer feel useful. On both a close level, where they've lost their job or whatever, they're not working, they don't feel like they have something useful to do. But oftentimes society in general just doesn't treat them as sort of a useful member of society because we are so youth-orientated. But it's a health risk. Both of these health risks carry the same morbidity as being obese or smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's that much of a health risk. As a matter of fact, you may not have known it, but in the UK, they actually now have a minister of loneliness. Yeah, just because of this. And you think of the England or the United Kingdom as, you think of London, some of the big cities, but it's a very rural place. And it gets very, very isolated. Well, we're in what I consider to be not a city here, but if you've traveled out to the western part of the state at all, it's very isolated out there. I mean, it's really, really very different out there. But even again, you don't have to be that kind of isolated to feel that you're no longer being useful. I had one statistic here. It was published in the New York Times about a year or so ago. It says that found that senior citizens who did not feel useful to others were nearly 3 times as likely to die prematurely as those that did feel useful. So it really is a big deal. And when you think about it, again, we are also wired to be kind. I'm always hearing from our caregivers that, I go and I do this for somebody, I do that for somebody, but honestly, Doug, I think I get more out of it than they do. I come back feeling good. I have, a reason to get up in the morning, a reason to get dressed and get out there and help somebody. It really, really helps me because it builds both social networks, the person that you're helping and your own. So our problem is that, in the boomer generation, which I'm a part of and some of you probably are a part of, we're a big chunk. We don't have this population coming up behind us. So, our biggest problem as a business, and not only that, I sit on the board for Bay Path Elder Services, which is a big nonprofit in the area that really distributes all the federal and state funding. We set up a lot of home care for people. We've got probably 1,300 clients that use our services. But the last statistic that I saw at the board meeting was that we have 200 people waiting to get service. Why? We don't have the people to take care of them. We don't have anybody to send, even for a day. We don't. Not just us. We contract with all the home care agencies in the area. They don't have the people. The problem is, as we're aging, there's not a group of caregivers coming along behind that are going to help and take over that. So I'm not talking about, there are traditional caregivers like CNAs and personal care assistants, but these are really task-oriented. They work with medical and personal care. And what I'm looking at is more non-traditional caregivers, people that I call them like friendly neighbors. You're just going to go visit somebody. You're going to go, maybe offer to help them with shopping or get organized. Probably half the people that we deal with are beginning to deal with some form of mild cognitive impairment. So that doesn't mean just memory loss. What happens in that, it also means you have a hard time organizing things. You have a hard time thinking about the different steps in a task that you need to do. And so we really help them organize their day. Look at the day or look at the week. You've got a doctor's appointment here. You've got to go here. We're going to go do this. It's really becoming very, very much an issue. But the most important thing, again, is really just being with the person, to keep them company. I know that's hard to read. It says the happiest people are the givers, not the takers. So all my suggestion is to you is that if you look at your longevity dividend, if you look and say, okay, yeah, I've got 10 years, whatever it might be, to say, what do I want to spend it on? But take a piece of it and give it to somebody. Help somebody else, because it will make you happier, it will make them better, and really, nowadays, everybody's your neighbor is the way I look at it. It's not just people in Wellesley or in your next street. Your neighborhood is just a much bigger place. So if you want to really be healthy and happy, I'm going to just take a look what I wrote here. And again, it gives you a feeling that you're not outdated, that you're useful, that you are still here for a reason. So that's my main point. Do something that makes a difference. It doesn't make any difference how big or small it is. You can't quantify kindness. Get out of your comfort zone. Again, do something new, do something different. Try something new. That's how you're going to really help your brain stay healthy. Stay engaged. One of the things that I see, I say fiercely, I actually have t-shirts made up that say age fiercely on them. It's more of a reminder to me. And because I think you need to be passionate about things. I don't think passion necessarily goes away as you age. If it does, I think that's, that's up to you too, and you have more choices than ever before. And I'll leave you with this. And what time is it? I got time. Let me tell you a really short story. Has anybody ever heard of the starfish story? No? You think you might have? It's been around for a while. It's in various different formats, but it really is a good illustration of what I'm talking about. There's an older gentleman who lives by the ocean, and he goes for a walk on the beach every day. And one day he goes down and sees that it's been an extremely high tide. And the whole beach, for as far as he can see, is covered in starfish. They've been washed up by the beach, and the sea now is receding. And in the distance, he sees somebody down there. It looks like they're dancing, there. And as he walks closer, what he finds is that it's a woman who picks up the starfish, walks down to the water, and throws the starfish into the water. And he watches for a little bit, then he can't help himself. He walks over to her and says, "So what are you doing?" And she says, "Well, I'm throwing the starfish back, because if I don't, they're gonna die." And he says, "You should be really realistic. There are thousands of starfish here. There's just you. You can't possibly make a difference." So she just turns her back to him, picks up a starfish, throws it back in the water, and says, "Made a difference to that one." So, thank you very much. I'm open to any questions that you might have. Well, again, thank you very much for coming, for being a good group. Thanks. Yeah.